Okay, let's get into it. We are tackling a monumental idea today. I mean, this is one of the 102 great ideas, a concept so foundational it underpins, well, pretty much every legal, moral, and political conversation we have.
It really does.
Our focus today is on justice.
And approaching justice through this great ideas framework, specifically from the Syntopicon essay, is fascinating.
Yeah.
It isn't treated as just another concept. It's positioned as the supreme criterion for the entire moral architecture of a society.
It's the ultimate metric.
It's the metric by which we measure a good life in a functioning community, yes.
Now, for those of you who appreciate gaining knowledge quickly but also thoroughly, just a quick note. You are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for a deeper, more dynamic analysis of this essay.
And our mission here is to move beyond just the common definitions, right?
Right. Exactly. We want to extract the most important nuggets of insight. We really want to understand how justice works as a practical standard, how it dictates giving each person their due, how it limits power, and maybe most critically, how it orders our pursuit of liberty and equality.
It's the practical standard for human action, both for the individual and for the group. If you get justice, you get the necessary structure of a decent society.
So let's start right there with that foundational definition. The essay calls justice the supreme practical standard. What does that actually mean for us, the listener?
It means it's the final word, the authoritative criterion for arranging every aspect of social life. I'm talking about the distribution of rights, the imposition of duties, how we allocate rewards, and how we impose punishments.
It's practical because it's about action.
Right. And it's supreme because no other social goal, not even liberty, can legitimately override it. Its core function really is to make sure each person and each group gets what is due to them. And that has to be consistent with, our inherent shared human dignity.
What's so fascinating to me here is the way the philosopher Mortimer Adler treats this. He calls justice an unlimited good. That seems a little counterintuitive given how much we argue about it. What does he mean? A society can't have too much justice.
It's such a critical philosophical move.
Yeah.
It elevates justice above almost every other value we talk about in politics.
Yeah.
Adler is arguing that if a situation is genuinely, truly just, there's no moral argument to stop it or dial it back.
You can't say, we have too much fairness.
Exactly. You can't say, well, the courts are being a little too integral, let's pull back. The statement is just absurd on its face. Justice, in its very essence, can't be had in excess.
But other values can, and that's the key, isn't it? Things like liberty or equality, if you take them to an extreme, they become destructive.
Precisely. And this is the central theme the essay keeps coming back to.
Yeah.
I mean, think about liberty without any constraints, what John Locke called a state of license. It quickly devolves into the tyranny of the powerful over the weak. In economics, you get monopolies and exploitation. In our personal lives, you get aggression. And that is, by definition, unjust, because it denies the weak what is due to them, their safety, their fair treatment.
Okay, and what about equality? We tend to think of that as a universal good.
And it is a good, but it has to be measured by justice. If you pursue it without that measure, it also becomes a form of tyranny. If a system tries to enforce a kind of absolute radical equality of outcome, a total uniformity, it has to crush all the legitimate differences that come from effort or talent or contribution.
It fails the test of desert.
It completely fails
Yeah.
it. If someone justly earns a reward through their hard work, and you deny them that reward in the name of some enforced equality, you've committed an injustice.
So justice is the higher measure. It's the governor, the calibrator. It says we can only have as much freedom and equality as justice allows. It's the backstop.
That's the perfect word for it. It coordinates them and points them toward the common good. Without justice setting those limits, liberty just becomes selfish interest and oppression, and equality becomes this arbitrary, soul-crushing uniformity. Justice is what makes a durable, decent common life possible.
Okay, so to really understand this idea of justice as a supreme standard, we have to go back to this source material. We have to start with Plato. His vision of justice is so often described as transcendent. Where does justice even begin for him in the Republic?
For Plato, it begins somewhere completely external to human whims and opinions. It starts, and this is profound, not in the state, but inside the individual soul. Plato sees justice as a state of harmony within the soul.
The famous charioteer analogy.
Right. The rational part of the soul, the charioteer, has to rule the spirited part, which is our noble passions, and the appetitive part, our base desires. When each part does its job properly, all under the rule of reason, then the individual person is just.
And the city, the polis, is just a large-scale version of that, a mirror.
That's exactly it. The city is just when it's three classes. The philosopher rulers who represent reason, the guardians who represent spirit, and the producers who represent appetite. Each perform their proper function and don't meddle in the other's business. Justice isn't about balancing competing interests for Plato, it's about a unified, functional hierarchy.
The implication there is huge. It means justice is grounded in an eternal moral order. It exists completely outside of human laws or shifting cultural norms.
Yes, that's why we call it transcendent. For Plato, justice is part of the form of the good. It exists absolutely, whether we recognize it or not. And this gives his philosopher rulers their mission. They have to govern according to this eternal truth, the good itself, which only they can see after years of rigorous training.
So institutions have to reflect this higher rational standard.
They must. It's a complete rejection of the idea that law is just the will of the strongest or whatever the majority happens to want today.
It can sound almost authoritarian to us now, but the philosophical power is that justice has this objective, non-negotiable anchor.
Exactly. It's an entire intellectual structure built to defeat that sophist argument that might makes right. By tying justice to the good, Plato gives us this powerful external check on political power. The ruler has to obey the truth, even if it's not in his immediate self-interest.
But then the conversation immediately pivots with his student, Aristotle. Plato looks up to the heavens, to the eternal forms, but Aristotle, he seems to bring the focus right back down to earth, to the immanent, concrete life of the city.
That's a perfect way to put it. Aristotle shifts the whole study of justice from metaphysics to ethics and political science. For him, justice is, first and foremost, a virtue, a stable character trait that governs how we deal with other people. It's rooted in the actual social, economic, and political life of the city.
And Aristotle is the one who gives us the practical framework, the distinctions that we still use in law schools today.
He does. The main distinction is between the two big categories of political justice. First, you have distributive justice. This is all about allocating the community's resources, things like goods, honors, public offices, and even burdens like taxes or military service.
And it's not about equal shares for everyone.
No, and this is critical. It's done according to proportion. It might be based on merit or desert or contribution. It's a system of proportionate shares, not equal ones.
So distributive justice is about setting the rules of the game, deciding who deserves what based on some rational criteria.
Precisely. And then second, you have corrective justice, which is sometimes called rectificatory justice. This is the mechanism that kicks in after an injustice has happened.
Like a broken contract or a crime.
Exactly. Whether it was a voluntary transaction like a contract or an involuntary one like a theft, corrective justice just wants to restore the equality that was disturbed by that action. It looks at the two parties as just person A and person B, ignoring their social rank or merit, and it focuses only on balancing the ledger.
It's transactional, while distributive justice is about the initial social arrangement.
Absolutely. If a thief steals $100, corrective justice says return $100. It's aiming for a simple arithmetic equality to make things whole again.
And of course, being Aristotle, he has to connect justice back to the human telos, our ultimate purpose or goal.
This is critical to his whole project. The telos of human life is eudaimonia, human flourishing, living well. And for Aristotle, we're political animals. We can only achieve that flourishing inside a polis that's governed by law. Therefore, a just constitution is one that helps free and equal citizens achieve that goal. Justice is the primary virtue of the state itself.
So if we step back, what we're left with from the classical world is this fundamental, enduring tension.
The contrast is really stark. You have Plato, with his single, unitary, transcendent form of justice, knowable only by a few, reflected in this rigid, hierarchical city. It's top-down and ideal-driven.
And then Aristotle,
who gives us a pluralistic system. Many kinds of justice, distributive, corrective, all embedded in the messy reality of laws, customs, and balanced constitutions. His approach is pragmatic and context-dependent.
And later thinkers, they couldn't escape this dynamic, could they? It's like they had to choose a side.
They inherited both pressures. I mean, the whole concept of natural law, which becomes so important later on, draws heavily from that Platonic idea of a moral standard that's higher than any king or any state.
It gives you the intellectual justification for revolution.
It does. The idea that a king's law can be unjust, that it can be invalid if it violates a higher moral law, is incredibly powerful.
At the same time, the development of our complex legal systems, checks and balances, separation of powers, due process, that feels purely Aristotelian.
Entirely. The U.S. Constitution, with its focus on balancing factions and refining processes to ensure fairness, rather than imposing a single perfect vision of society, that's Aristotle's pragmatic search for the best achievable system. This tension between the timeless principle and the functional procedure really becomes the operating system for Western legal thought.
So moving forward in time, we get to the medieval period, which takes on this massive project of integrating all this classical thought with Christian theology. How did figures like Augustine and Aquinas change the conversation about justice?
They essentially sanctified it. They treated justice as both a cardinal virtue, which is in line with Aristotle, but also, and this is crucial, as a participation in divine law. The classical ideas were synthesized with doctrines of creation, sin, and grace. The logic was, if God created the world with a rational order, then that order itself dictates what just relations between people should be.
And this synthesis seems to lead to two very clear categories of justice emerging from that era.
Yes, they laid them out very clearly. First, there's natural justice, or natural law. This is the part of justice that human reason, all on its own, can figure out just by observing human nature in society. Things about fair dealing, basic rights, the common good. For Aquinas, this is accessible to everyone, regardless of faith.
And the second type.
Supernatural justice. This was about the right relationship between a human being and God, matters of salvation, grace, piety. But even this supernatural element had a political effect. It reinforced the idea that rulers were subject to an external moral check.
Why was that integration so critical for the development of Western political thought?
It was absolutely essential for building the foundation for the universal human rights that we take for granted today. By grounding our rights in a divine, transcendent moral order, those rights were protected from the arbitrary will of a king or a parliament.
It makes justice an absolute measure of legitimate government.
Exactly. If a ruler tried to violate a fundamental human right, medieval thinkers could argue he wasn't just violating a social contract, he was violating God's law.
Then we hit the early modern era, the age of Descartes, Hobbes, Locke, and another seismic shift happens. The focus seems to move away from the community's purpose and squarely onto the rights and the consent of the individual.
That's absolutely right. The main concern becomes preventing government tyranny. Justice becomes almost synonymous with creating a system where individual liberty is protected and power is contained. The whole emphasis shifts to individual rights, the consent of the governed, and this legal mechanism of the social contract.
And justice becomes the engine for constitutionalism and, well, for revolution.
It absolutely does. You see it reflected so powerfully in modern bills of rights and democratic constitutions. Justice becomes procedural. It becomes institutionalized.
So a just government isn't defined by its adherence to some transcendent good anymore.
No, it's defined by its practical ability to secure the fundamental rights of its citizens. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. The mechanisms that ensure justice are things we can build and see. Limited powers, the rule of law applying to everyone equally, and equal citizenship. It's a move toward defining justice by the process that protects our freedom.
Which brings us right back to Adler's brilliant grouping of liberty, equality, and justice. We've traced the history, but that core thesis is still there. Justice is the standard that has to measure the other two.
We have to keep reiterating that because it's the most powerful takeaway from this entire essay. Liberty and equality are not ultimate ends in themselves. They are goods, yes, but they are only legitimate when they are subordinated to justice. If you pursue them without that constraint, they inevitably lead to tyranny.
Let's get really concrete here, because this is where the theory hits modern life. Give us some layered examples of what this calibration looks like.
Okay, take the idea of unregulated liberty in the world of information today. If we allow absolute freedom to publish anything at all, including malicious lies or dangerous incitement, that liberty quickly starts to oppress the dignity and rights of the people being targeted.
So justice demands limits.
Of course. Justice demands limits on speech, like laws against defamation, to protect the vulnerable. That is a perfect example of justice calibrating liberty.
And what about in the economic realm, with enforced equality?
Well, imagine a government decides that every university graduate must earn the exact same salary, no matter their field, their skill, or how hard they work. It's trying to enforce an equality of outcome.
But it's profoundly unjust.
It's violently unjust because it completely rejects the principle of desert, what is due to a person based on their contribution. Justice doesn't demand equal outcomes. It demands fair opportunity and proportionate reward. By insisting on proportionality, justice limits the state's drive toward an unjust uniformity.
So the phrase to remember is that liberty and equality are only permitted as justice allows.
That's it. Justice is the measuring stick. It determines the right amount and the right kind of the other two, making sure they actually serve human dignity instead of undermining it.
This inherent limit that justice imposes brings us straight to what is maybe the single most critical conflict in all of political thought, the debate between might versus right.
This is the argument that never goes away. It's been with us since the ancient sophists. Thrasymachus, in Plato's Republic, famously says that justice is nothing else than the interest of the stronger. It's the view that identifies justice with sheer advantage or expediency.
Whatever the powerful say is just.
In its most cynical form, yes. Whatever the ruler dictates, whatever keeps the current regime in power, that's justice.
The stakes in that debate are just monumental. It's asking, is law just a tool that rulers use to control people, or is it a rational, independent moral standard that binds everyone, including the rulers?
If law is just power, then there's no such thing as injustice when a ruler breaks his own laws, because the only rule is, do what works for you. But if justice is an independent moral standard, it means even the sovereign, even the king, is subject to a higher rational law.
And we see this conflict pop up again and again throughout history.
Every time a system from an ancient empire justifying conquest to a modern totalitarian regime disregards moral law in the name of power or historical necessity, this is the debate we're having.
The moment a state claims it's above that moral standard, that law is just a tool. According to this framework, it ceases to be a legitimate state.
It becomes a tyranny. It doesn't matter what it claims about efficiency or destiny. The entire structure of Western constitutionalism, with its focus on the rule of law and not the rule of men, is a direct counterattack against the might makes right philosophy. The whole point of justice as a standard is to check unchecked power.
And distinguishing might from right requires, continuous critical thought and rigorous analysis, especially now.
It absolutely does. These questions are never settled for good.
Yeah.
And that kind of continuous engagement and rational analysis is something we actively try to inspire.
Which is actually a perfect moment to share a resource with you, the listener. We really encourage you to seek out Mindful Moments. That's our YouTube channel. It offers AI essay analysis, summaries, and critiques of these kinds of complex ideas, all of it designed to inspire reflection and rational thought. It's the ideal place to keep exploring these huge intellectual puzzles. Let's move to section number 4 and really map out how justice is applied. The Great Book's tradition shows us justice isn't just one thing. It breaks down into recurring types, and it operates on multiple levels at the same time. Let's start with the types.
Well, I've already touched on the two classical ones. First, distributive justice, which is about allocating shares and burdens, who gets what. This applies to everything from taxes to social welfare programs.
Right. And second, corrective justice, the redress of wrongs, making things whole again, whether in civil disputes or criminal law.
Third, and this is so critical for modern society, is procedural justice. This is about the fairness of the process itself. Things like due process, the right to a fair trial, rules of evidence. Justice doesn't just have to be done, it has to be seen to be done.
And then fourth, the big picture view, social or political justice.
This refers to the overall structure of our institutions. It asks, does the system as a whole, our economy, our constitution, our laws, does it promote fairness and dignity for everyone, especially for the most vulnerable groups? This is where so much of our contemporary political debate is focused.
And beyond these types, justice also shows up at different levels of our lives. It's not just a government thing.
No, not at all. It starts at the most personal level, personal virtue.
Yeah.
Justice is a habit of character demanding integrity from each of us. Then it extends out to our interpersonal conduct, our daily promises, our business dealings, how we treat our neighbors.
Then the level of institutional design.
Right, the whole realm of lawmaking and government structure. And finally, the most complex level. The international or cosmopolitan order. This is where we have to grapple with these immense questions about the justice of war, global trade, climate change, the legacy of empire. It forces us to ask if justice can really be universal.
That complexity can make the whole task of being just seem overwhelming. But the essay notes that many traditions try to operationalize it with a very simple principle of reciprocity. The golden rule.
The golden rule, treat others as you would rationally consent to be treated, is an incredibly powerful immediate test for both personal conduct and institutional fairness. It defines justice by forcing you to adopt the other person's perspective, to recognize your shared vulnerability and equal moral status.
So how does it work as a kind of moral detector to expose injustice?
It immediately flags selective application. Injustice is revealed whenever rules are applied unequally, when the powerful exempt themselves from the burdens they put on everyone else, or when they design systems that just happen to benefit their own group. The test is, if you were on the receiving end of this rule, would you rationally agree to it?
It's an internal check against self-interest that's disguised as principle.
Inversely, it shifts the question from, what do I want to do to them, to what would be a rule that all of us could rationally agree to live under. That simple shift is the very essence of justice as reciprocity.
On the macro level, justice is really the guiding principle for constitutional democracies. We see it in phrases like securing domestic peace and promoting the general welfare.
All those constitutional aims are, at their core, balancing acts, and justice is the standard that resolves them. Take security versus liberty. In a time of crisis like World War II, governments increase surveillance and restrict freedoms in the name of security. Justice has to answer the question, how much security can we have before we cross the line into tyranny?
Or the balancing act with the general welfare.
Exactly. If a state provides too much welfare, it risks creating dependency and undermining the principle of desert for those who contribute. Justice has to ask, how much welfare ensures human dignity without crippling individual responsibility? And the classic one is freedom versus order. How much individual freedom can a society allow before you get so much disorder and chaos that the system itself collapses? These delicate balances can't be resolved by just polling or political expediency. They have to be resolved by referring back to a substantive, robust account of justice. Justice provides the criteria for drawing those necessary lines.
Let's move to the highest challenge then, the journey toward actually grasping and applying this idea. The essay lays out a four-step framework moving from mere opinion all the way up to wisdom.
And this is maybe the most useful practical framework for you, the listener. Most of us, most of the time, are operating at the level of opinion. These are just contested, unstable views about what's fair, fair pay, fair punishment. They're heavily shaped by our self-interest, our culture, our ideology.
They often lack a rational defense beyond "it just feels right."
That's it. The next step up, a huge leap, is knowledge. This is what you get through formal study. It's about knowing the stable criteria provided by legal systems, ethical theories, constitutional principles. A person with knowledge knows the rules, the precedents, the procedures. They can navigate the system.
But then you have to ascend to understanding, the integration phase.
Understanding is moving beyond just knowing the rules to knowing why the rules exist. It means integrating the personal virtue of honesty, the civic structure of a legal system, and the moral law about fairness into one coherent picture. A constitutional scholar is aiming for understanding. They see the principles behind the rules.
And then the pinnacle, wisdom. What separates wisdom from just understanding?
Wisdom is judgment. It's the ability to apply those integrated principles in the hardest of cases, where goods conflict, or where the law itself seems unjust, or where mercy has to temper strict desert. The wise leader has to apply principles with compassion, aiming for the long-term common good. It's the ability to navigate moral ambiguity justly.
So, to even start on that journey, we need serious, well-constructed theories of justice. What does a serious theory have to accomplish?
The requirements are tough. First, it has to define its terms clearly. What do you mean by right, by merit, by need? Vague definitions are useless. Second, it has to be internally coherent. It can't contradict itself. And third, it has to give you sufficient rational reasons for its claims about who deserves what and why. It has to be defensible.
And even if a theory is perfectly rational on paper, it still has to pass 3 truth tests against the real world.
Absolutely. The first is correspondence. Does the theory actually match social and psychological reality? If your theory assumes all humans are perfectly rational or ignores that resources are scarce, it fails. It has to account for human nature as it really is.
The second is coherence with other knowledge.
This means your theory of justice can't contradict established truths from other fields, like economics or psychology or history. A theory of racial justice, for example, has to be coherent with the sociological facts about systemic disadvantage.
And the final, most practical test, pragmatic success. Does it actually work?
This is the ultimate test. When you apply the theory in the real world, does it foster peace, build trust, and encourage human flourishing over the long haul? If a theory is beautiful on paper but leads to social collapse when you implement it, it's a pragmatic failure. Justice has to be functional.
So, after millennia of philosophy and law and real-world struggle, the essay concludes that the conversation about justice is still wide open. Why can't we just settle it?
Because the disagreements are so foundational, and the world is always changing. We still argue about whether justice is about following strict rules or achieving equitable results. Is it about desert, what you earn or need, what you require to live a dignified life?
The conflict between individual rights and social cohesion is a constant battle.
Yes. And the great modern challenge is pushing justice beyond our own borders. Questions of national sovereignty versus global obligation on trade, on refugees, on climate, they're constantly pushing our principles to their limits. And new technologies like AI and surveillance are forcing us to invent principles for situations the ancients never even dreamed of.
The essay points out that concrete cases, economic inequality, racial injustice, the ethics of new technologies are always putting pressure on our abstract principles and showing us where they fall short.
They force us to go back to the drawing board. Justice isn't some destination we arrive at. It's a process of continuous refinement. The practical measure of our success isn't just defining the theory, it's about how capable we and our institutions become at actually applying the standard.
And what does that wise application look like?
It looks like institutions that treat all people as ends in themselves, not just as means to an end. It looks like a system that effectively limits power by grounding law in right, not just might. And at the end of the day, it looks like a sustained, durable, decent common life that gives all citizens the chance to flourish. That is the ultimate test of the supreme practical standard.
What a rigorous analysis. We've explored the split between Plato and Aristotle, the crucial integration in the medieval era, how justice calibrates liberty and equality, and that necessary journey from mere opinion to applied wisdom. This essay really does help move us from just information to the potential for wise action.
And that potential for action is what it's all about. If we accept the premise that justice is an unlimited good, a supreme standard that has to measure all our other social goods, then what current social structure must we reevaluate immediately to see if it's being measured by liberty or equality instead of being measured by justice itself? That's the challenge we leave you with.
Food for thought indeed. If you want to review the full, in-depth essay analysis and continue thinking rationally about these massive ideas, we have the resources ready for you. Click the link on screen for the in-depth essay summary, subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go.